From the very beginning, my world was shaken when my own mother-in-law, whom I refer to as Mill, decided, behind my back, to tamper with the name I had chosen for my unborn child. In a move that felt both intrusive and disrespectful, she demanded that I name my daughter after herself, insidiously insisting that the little one should carry the name Susan. This unilateral decision, made without my knowledge or consent, left me with no option but to ban her from coming near my baby. I am a 31-year-old expectant mother, eagerly awaiting the arrival of my precious daughter, who is due in a mere 5 weeks. Every time I imagine holding her in my arms, my heart overflows with a love so deep it brings me to tears. After all, nurturing a child in your womb for 40 magical weeks is an experience that transforms your very soul. Please remember to subscribe, like, and share for the support of my channel. Your encouragement means everything to me. I vividly recall the moments that led up to this explosive confrontation. Ever since we discovered that we were expecting a baby girl, Mill had been relentlessly pestering us to name her Susan, a name that held personal significance for her. She claimed that it was a long-standing family tradition to name the newborn after the grandparents, a custom she insisted on following even though it clearly did not apply in our situation. For instance, my husband was not named after his own paternal grandfather, but was, in fact, named after Susan's father. This blatant contradiction only fueled my determination not to succumb to her demands. Initially, when she casually floated the idea during my 5th-month antenatal visit, I did not feel particularly troubled. I assumed it was merely a passing suggestion. However, as the pregnancy progressed, and we celebrated the revelation of our baby's gender at a lively party in my 7th month, her behavior began to take on a more insidious tone. A week after the gender reveal celebration, she unexpectedly arrived at our home under the guise of checking in on my well-being. With my husband away at the time, she nonchalantly remarked, "Oh, then it's a baby girl," and followed it up with a cryptic comment about having my little Susan inside of you. I was taken aback, offering only a confused smile, unsure whether her words were meant as a twisted compliment or a subtle claim of ownership over my child. In the days that followed, her visits became increasingly frequent and unsettling. Each time she inquired about my health or the baby's movements, she would cryptically note, "Oh, my little Susan must be resting," as though she were referring to a presence that belonged to her rather than my unborn daughter. Her persistent insinuations eventually wore down my patience, and I found myself compelled to ask her outright what she meant by repeatedly referring to my baby as Susan. The answer she gave was as shocking as it was infuriating. She insisted that our baby should be named Susan, in honor of her own grandmother, a tradition she claimed was deeply rooted in our family history. My mind reeled at the absurdity of it all. Not only did her logic lack consistency, but it also felt like an overt power play aimed at undermining my role as the mother of my child. Though my face betrayed my inner turmoil and disapproval, I initially chose to remain silent, hoping the matter would dissipate on its own. Unfortunately, my long-standing issues with Mill had never been resolved since the early days of my marriage. Ever since I tied the knot, she had proven to be a meddlesome and calculating presence in our lives, a truly wicked woman whose interference had become a recurring source of distress. My husband, a practical and no-nonsense man, recognized the mounting tension and, without much fuss, advised me to maintain a distance from his mother. I accepted his counsel wholeheartedly, grateful for his steadfast support and relief at not having to constantly deal with her manipulative behavior. For a while, it seemed that her influence over our lives had dwindled to nothing. Yet, as my pregnancy advanced, her relentless intrusions resumed with renewed vigor. Under the pretext of checking on my health, she began visiting far too frequently, and it soon became painfully clear that her true motive was to impose her own agenda on the naming of my baby. Over the course of more than a month, while my hormones surged and my emotions were pushed to their limits, I reached a breaking point. Yesterday, when she arrived in the afternoon, precisely at the time when I was about to indulge in a much-needed nap, my frustration exploded. I have often wondered why she seems to have an uncanny ability to show up exactly when I am most vulnerable, as if she revels in disrupting my brief moments of rest during the exhausting 3rd trimester. I had no choice but to confront her directly. The previous time I had tried to ignore her knock at the door, it had escalated into chaos when she frantically called my husband, claiming there was an emergency because I wasn't responding. Determined not to let history repeat itself, I answered this time, but made it clear that I was not going to tolerate any further references to my baby as Susan. We sat together for a few tense minutes, and as I prepared to return to my work, she casually remarked, "Okay, I'll leave you to take care of my little Susan." Her words stung, and I could feel my anger simmering as I returned to my workstation. Unable to contain my frustration any longer, I finally asked her if she was truly serious about imposing this name on my daughter. With a resolute yes from her, I looked her straight in the eyes and declared, with unwavering determination, that I would never name my baby Susan. I pressed further, questioning her about the supposed family tradition. Why, for example, my husband was not named after his own grandfather, but instead after her father. Caught off guard, she stuttered and fumbled for an explanation, but before she could fabricate any more lies, I coolly countered that if it were truly a tradition, I might as well name my daughter after my own mother. Her face flushed with shock and disbelief, and in that moment, she stormed out, muttering under her breath in a fit of rage. When my husband later arrived and inquired about the commotion, he mentioned that his mother had called him, furious that I had refused her demand to name our daughter Susan, and had even suggested naming her after my own mother instead. Although he tried to calm me by saying, "You know how Mommy is. I couldn't help but roll my eyes internally and silently wish that I had told her off more harshly. An update soon followed that filled me with both joy and lingering apprehension. Hello, everyone. I'm over the moon as I cradle my gorgeous baby in my arms while writing this update. My little one arrived a week ago, much earlier than the expected 5 weeks out. In fact, she made her appearance 2 weeks ahead of schedule, eager to meet Mama. For a moment, I thought that the nightmare with Mill was finally behind me, and that she would no longer meddle in my family affairs. Alas, I quickly realized I had severely underestimated her tenacity. Within just a few days after our initial confrontation, my mother-in-law, or rather, the woman obsessed with imposing her will, Susan, once again called my husband. She claimed that she was deeply upset because I had not only refused to name the baby after her, but had also allegedly threatened to ban her from my daughter's life. These allegations were completely unfounded. I had never uttered such words. At that time, I was already at the peak of my pregnancy, and my husband, ever the protector, insisted that I not be burdened with such baseless accusations. However, my blood boiled when I heard these falsehoods. Despite her insistence, my husband eventually went to speak with her. In a dramatic meeting filled with feigned tears and overblown apologies, she demanded nothing less than a granddaughter bearing her name. My husband firmly stated that our baby was our child, and that such a decision was ours alone. The argument escalated rapidly, with Susan threatening to sever ties completely if we did not comply with her orders. At first, I internally conceded that, as his mother, she held a place in his heart, and perhaps a compromise might be acceptable, but only if it did not affect our official naming. However, when he casually proposed that I let her call our daughter Susan as a pet name while retaining the official name I had chosen, I was utterly aghast. I made it unequivocally clear that not only would our daughter never be officially known as Susan, but that the very sound of that name would be unwelcome in our home. Although my husband was visibly agitated by my refusal, I was in no state, physically or emotionally, to engage in further conflict. Ultimately, we shifted our focus to preparing for the baby's arrival, shopping for her needs, and setting up our home for her arrival, while the contentious naming debate simmered quietly in the back of my mind. As fate would have it, my labor began unexpectedly early, and within days, our baby's arrival transformed our close-knit circle of family and friends into a whirlwind of celebration. Yet, amid all the joy and new beginnings, one thing remained painfully absent: Susan. My husband later brought up the lingering issue, asking if I was still steadfast in my decision not to honor his mother's wish by naming our baby after her. In what should have been a moment of serene happiness, I found myself embroiled in yet another difficult discussion. My husband argued that there was no harm in allowing his side of the family to refer to our daughter as Susan, provided that, at home, we used the official name I had chosen. Reluctantly, I conceded to this compromise, though I made it abundantly clear that neither he nor I would ever address our daughter by that name. Deep down, however, I harbored a sense of foreboding. Why should I yield to the demands of a woman who had not even bothered to meet her granddaughter properly, and whose arrogance was so palpable that she refused to show even the slightest deference to our wishes? The situation took another dramatic turn when, true to her relentless nature, Mill reappeared with an extravagant display of affection for her so-called Susan. She visited our home bearing enormous banners and posters emblazoned with messages such as, "Welcome baby Susan," and "Love you Susan," leaving no item in her wake untouched by her fixation on that name. Every gift she brought was adorned with either the name Susan or the initial S, even though my daughter's name actually starts with an R. Not only that, but she decked everything out in her favorite color, green. I couldn't help but be amused and exasperated at the sight of my baby clad head to toe in green onesies, mittens, and socks, a color scheme I never even knew existed for baby apparel until I saw it with my own eyes. Despite my subtle attempts to remind her that it was my baby's nap time, she completely disregarded my requests and continued her excessive displays, disrupting my daughter's sleep cycle. Although I felt an overwhelming urge to snatch my baby away from her clutches, I refrained from doing so, not wanting to incite yet another confrontation in the absence of my husband. In a fit of resignation, I eventually removed every trace of the green decorations from our home, hoping to reclaim some semblance of normalcy. Over the course of the last 3 months, Mill has orchestrated an array of bizarre and infuriating schemes. One such stunt was the creation of a dedicated social media page for my baby under the moniker Baby Susan, where she continuously posts photos and videos. While many parents today choose to share the milestones of their children online, I have always been cautious about exposing my daughter to the superficial pressures of social media. I have only ever shared one announcement of her arrival, deliberately keeping her identity private, but my relentless mother-in-law seems to have no boundaries when it comes to publicizing her version of our family story. Her constant barrage of posts, fueled by an insatiable desire for likes and validation, is not only invasive, but also deeply unsettling, as it subjects my daughter to a world of superficial admiration before she is even old enough to understand it. The final straw came during my baby's baptism. In a ceremony that was meant to be a sacred and joyful rite of passage, the priest began the service by calling my daughter Susan a mistake, or perhaps a deliberate act of sabotage. I was mortified to realize that the baptism form, which I had carefully filled out, had been surreptitiously altered. I soon discovered that Mill, who also works for the church as a bookkeeping aide, had taken advantage of her access to change the official records, ensuring that my daughter's name appeared as Susan. In a moment of public humiliation and deep personal hurt, I interrupted the ceremony and corrected the priest, declaring that my daughter's true name was not Susan. The incident plunged the entire service into chaos. My husband tried to intervene, urging me to calm down and dismiss the triviality of a name. But to me, it was far more than that. It was a deeply personal affront and an act of betrayal that I could not simply overlook. In the aftermath, during a family lunch organized for close relatives and friends, the confrontation escalated once again. Mill, ever the provocateur, began accusing me of publicly humiliating her, and she even went as far as to blame me for manipulating her son against her. The argument grew so heated that, in a moment of exasperated clarity, I told her that if she wished to chain my husband to her side like a possession, she was free to do so, but only if that was what she truly wanted. Her enraged outburst only confirmed my resolve to sever ties with her influence for the sake of my daughter's well-being. Later that evening, as I retreated to the sanctuary of my bedroom with my daughter cradled in my arms, my husband gently knocked on the door. Expecting further recriminations or anger directed at me for the public scene, I braced myself for another round of conflict. Instead, he enveloped me in a heartfelt embrace and apologized. He admitted that he should never have pushed me to accept his mother's relentless demands, and that our daughter's name was, and always would be, our choice. In that tender moment, he revealed that he had, in fact, banned his own mother from our lives until she could learn to respect our decisions and allow us the peace we so desperately needed during our baby's first year. Although I was shocked by his sudden change of heart, I was also relieved that he had taken such a decisive stand to protect our family. Switching gears to another chapter of my life, a story that feels like a saga of betrayal and heartache, I must share the second story. One day, I returned home unexpectedly with the intent of surprising my wife, only to stumble upon a scene that shattered my trust. I walked into our backyard and caught her, red-handed and exposed, in the company of another man. Let me take you through every excruciating detail of what happened. My wife and I had been married for just over a year before the cracks began to show, ultimately leading to our divorce. I first met her at a restaurant one evening when she was sitting alone, clearly waiting for someone who never arrived. Moved by her solitude, I struck up a conversation, and despite her evident melancholy, we connected deeply. After weeks of exchanging messages on Facebook, we went on our first date, and from that moment, it seemed as though our future together was destined to be filled with happiness and love. We married after a year of dating, and I was convinced that she, whom I lovingly called Belle, would be the final chapter in my search for a lasting relationship. I had grown tired of fleeting romances and the heartbreak that followed infidelity, believing I had finally found my perfect partner. Our relationship was built on mutual respect, love, and a shared commitment to working hard. She, a dedicated full-time remote worker, and I, constantly on the move due to a demanding job that required extensive travel. Despite my hectic schedule, I always strived to spend quality time with Belle, showering her with beautiful gifts, surprise dinners, and thoughtful gestures, hoping to create a future filled with memories and love. Yet, there was an underlying tension due to my frequent absences, which often left her feeling neglected, even though I did my utmost to compensate for my time away. I remember one particular time, when I returned from a week-long work trip in another state. Belle had arranged for a relaxing massage session for me, and even gifted me the latest pair of Jordan sneakers, a gesture that always warmed my heart. In return, she would prepare special meals, and set up our dining table for a romantic dinner at home. I always looked forward to coming back to her, eagerly anticipating the warmth and comfort of our shared moments. However, one fateful day, I decided to surprise her by coming home earlier than usual without informing her in advance. I stopped by her favorite restaurant to grab some takeout, and picked up a bottle of red wine, hoping to create an impromptu, delightful evening together. As I pulled into our driveway and entered our home with the surprises in hand, something was unmistakably off. Belle was there, half-dressed and visibly flustered, her skin glistening with sweat that spoke of hard, strenuous labor. Her disheveled appearance and edgy demeanor immediately set off alarm bells in my mind. When I asked her what was wrong, she brushed it off, attributing her condition to being caught off guard by my unexpected arrival and the oppressive summer heat. I tried to rationalize her behavior, but my instincts told me that something was amiss. As we chatted about my trip and the reason behind my early return, I suddenly heard a commotion from the backyard. My heart sank, and without a moment's hesitation, I decided to check our security cameras. Before I could even act, Belle attempted to stop me, insisting that it was probably nothing, and that I shouldn't worry because the sensor had already been triggered several times that day, a detail that struck me as highly unusual for her. Ignoring her protest, I accessed the security footage, and what I saw left me utterly shocked. Our two dogs were seen lunging at a man in our backyard, attacking him with unexpected ferocity. My initial disbelief turned to alarm as I recognized the intruder as someone who should not have been there. Belle feigned surprise, claiming that the man had broken into our house, and that she was trying to catch him off guard, fearing that my reaction would be too harsh if I discovered the lapse in our home security. Yet, deep down, I sensed that this was merely a ruse to cover up something far more sinister. My suspicions were confirmed when the man, who turned out to be Belle's secret lover, emerged from hiding. He was the very same man she had been meeting through her book club, a fact that shattered the remnants of trust one had in our relationship. In the aftermath of this harrowing discovery, I felt a torrent of emotions, betrayal, anger, and profound sadness. After the police arrived and handled the situation, I was overcome by a mix of fury and despair. In a moment of impulsive anger, I gathered up most of the belongings I had once bought for Belle and, in front of our disapproving neighbors, proceeded to throw her things out of the house. I even went so far as to burn some of the items that reminded me of our once happy union, including our cherished wedding portrait. Belle, in a desperate attempt to explain herself, pleaded for forgiveness and tried to justify her actions by claiming that she had only invited her lover over for a quiet book reading session. However, I knew deep down that these were nothing more than feeble lies meant to mask her infidelity. Once I had discarded every tangible reminder of our shared life, I was forced to call her younger sister to come and pick her up. Needing time to clear my head, I left the house and sought solace at my best friend's place. Later, after summoning the strength to face the reality of our shattered marriage, I contacted a divorce lawyer to begin the painful process of dissolving our union. The betrayal I experienced that day left an indelible mark on my soul. I had never imagined that the woman I envisioned spending the rest of my life with would betray me in such a profound and public manner. For many nights afterward, the haunting memories of that day tormented me, and even after our divorce, I remained a shadow of my former self. The scars of that experience have made it nearly impossible for me to trust or love again, and I find myself bracing for the possibility that any future relationship might end in a similar pattern of infidelity and heartache. Until I can fully heal, I have resolved to focus solely on my work and building a secure future for myself, determined to reclaim the comfort and stability that I once knew.